When it comes to old rides and attractions at Epcot, many of them have sadly made the extinct list, like Maelstrom, Universe of Energy, and the Wonders of Life Pavilion. Another one of these attractions was Horizons. Horizons was a retro space-themed ride talking about the future and how families will live in this slow-moving omni-mover ride. The attraction was a beloved ride for Epcot. However, its history of development and the constant reopening and closing makes it an interesting piece of history of Epcot. So in today's video, we are going to be talking and learning about the history of Horizons.
The most exciting, the most important part of our Florida project, in fact, the heart of everything we'll be doing in Disney World will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow. We call it Epcot.
In 1966, Walt Disney would start making a concept for his experimental prototype community of tomorrow, also known as Epcot.
Epcot will take its cue from the new ideas and new technologies that are now emerging from the creative centers of American industry.
The idea of Epcot would be a second theme park for the new Walt Disney Resort that would show how humanity worked in progressing through time. The design of the park would feature showcases and pavilions to show how humans progressed through time. Now sadly, in that same year, Walt Disney would sadly pass away, and his original version of Epcot would never become true. And though the Disney World Resort and Magic Kingdom would open, Epcot seemed like an abandoned thing shelved away in the Disney archives. But that was before Magic Kingdom became a smashing success for Florida. Because of how well the resort did for its first decade, Disney would start concepting the new version of Epcot that would officially begin in 1979. The layout of this Epcot was completely different, but definitely took inspiration from Walt Disney's original Epcot. It would feature showcases, pavilions, and everything else that was from the original concept. The pavilions and showcases would feature rides to feature each big milestone when it comes to humans, like with communication for Spaceship Earth, electricity for Universe of Energy, the Sea Pavilion for the sea, and the Imagination Pavilion about, well, imagination. There were also many other different concepts that wouldn't make it to opening day. One of them was Health and Fitness, which would be a pavilion about humans themselves and their biology. But the main pavilion that we're looking at is the Space and Inventions Pavilion. A pavilion that really didn't have some big concept to it. However, thanks to a deal with Disney and General Electric, Disney had a sponsor for this new pavilion. The concept of the pavilion would be that there was a main ride that had sort of an Edison look to it, and when the ride ended, you would enter into this exhibition hall that would feature various things for you to do and play, and kind of just show the technology. However, around this time, General Electric got a new CEO, and he kind of wanted the attraction to be a more futuristic. So, the ride was renamed to Central 3 and would have a different concept for the ride, with the building for this pavilion finished its concept stages. The pavilion would be also renamed to Future Probe, probably to fit in with the future theme. Inside this next concept for the ride, it was originally supposed to feature 3 massive double-decker OmniMax projection screens. This part of the attraction was sadly scaled down, and the attraction would actually get a $10 million budget cut. Still, at the same time, the building was massive, as it spanned to over 13,000 square feet, allowing the track to span over 1,003,000 feet. Making the attraction an almost 15-minute experience. The ride would feature an Omnimover system, which was similar to Haunted Mansion, but this time it was suspended in the air, so it was basically Haunted Mansion combined with Peter Pan's flight. Coming into the final stages for the concept, the pavilion would get one last name change, but this time it was its permanent name, and that name was Horizons. All of this concept stage had been decided in summer of 1981, just as Epcot began building its actual theme park. Horizons was well into development at this point. However, it became obvious that Horizons wouldn't make it to opening day. Instead, Epcot would open on October 1st of 1982, while the Horizons Pavilion was just starting its construction. And though there were more concepts at the time that would have allowed the monorail to go just right next to Horizons, these plans were eventually abandoned. But when building the actual building for the pavilion, nothing went wrong as construction continued. And after a year of Epcot being open, on the day being October 1st, 1983, Horizons, the ride, and the pavilion would officially open.
Step into the future in Epcot Center's newest adventure. Step into the future in Horizons. Step into the future today.
Horizons was the Epcot attraction. It combined everything that Epcot was into one futuristic attraction. After you get a look at the triangle pyramid-like exterior of the Horizons building, you would enter into a sorta airport-like queue, with signs featuring all the future locations that you'll be visiting within the ride itself. After going through the queue and boarding the Omnimover-like ride, you would enter into the first scene of the ride, featuring century-old depictions of what the future will look like. More specifically, Jules Verne's trip to the moon. In the next scene, a very retro future that never was is depicted, featuring robots vacuuming and cooking in this household. Televisions would appear in the next scene, showing pictures of the future and popular culture. The next room would feature a pretty abstract dark room filled with neon signs, envisioning a 50s version of the future. Then it would show more modern-day technological advances shown on those two massive OmniMax screens. Throughout this section of the ride, there would be glimpses of small narrative dialogues from the family, but it's in this scene that we actually get to meet them. You would see the daily lives of the family as they go about living in this retro future. We then see the daughter as she works a harvesting controller in Mesa Verde. The scene depicts a former desert turned into a crop-filled oasis. We then submerge underwater as we find the boyfriend in a sea castle, an underwater expedition facility. Finally, we visit Brava Centauri, a bustling and thriving space colony. There, you would include the family part of the ride, as all the family members appear on a hologram call, singing happy birthday to the newest member in their family. But this is where the interesting part comes in, because your ride doesn't conclude there. In fact, you get to actually choose your own way back to Futureport. 3 flashing buttons would suddenly appear on your ride vehicle, each having their own way of getting back. These options would include undersea, desert, or space. You then would enter a 50-foot screen that would match the speed of your vehicle as it played the option you chose from the vehicle. The films were built on enormous miniature models built specifically for Horizons, the desert one in particular being the longest continuous miniature shot ever made. As the ride concluded and guests walked through the exit tunnels, you would be greeted by one last piece of amazing artwork. A 60-foot long mural framed by the artist Robert Miguel, titled The Prologue and The Promise. The masterpiece took almost 9 months to complete and was a pretty inspirational send-off from Horizons. Like most Disney attractions, it had its own theme song. Originally, the Sherman Brothers were going to be the one that made one, as they made the song for Carousel of Progress, which Horizons was essentially the spiritual successor to it. The song was called Reaching New Horizons. But sadly, the song was ultimately deemed to not fit in with the futuristic themes that were within Horizons. So George Wilkins, along with cues from John Debney, wrote much of the new soundtrack for the ride, which was a brilliant piece of music that tied the whole pavilion together.
The Horizons Pavilion draws on the wisdom and countless scientists and visionaries to present a view of the future with an ending that you get to choose.
Easy living has always been just around the corner. Well, some ideas were a little hair-raising right from the start. But let's take a look at the future now.
Horizons operated between the 80s and the 90s and became a huge success for the Epcot theme park. The message of the attraction to give hope to our future made it a pretty inspiring attraction. Between its operation, changes to the attraction are very minimal. The exit though to the ride would sadly have the removal of the prologue and the promise due to the sponsor of the attraction realizing that the end doesn't have anything to associate with their sponsorship. The exit became this colorful tunnel where you would see a GM logo at the very end. Sadly, it is unknown to what happened to the artwork. Apparently, it was supposed to be shipped to California, but it most likely got destroyed, just only 3 years after it was put up. In 1993, General Electric's contract was up for renewal. Despite the $50 million that GM had spent on this attraction, they decided not to renew. Disney now would officially take the entire attraction under their own hands. The Horizon sign covered up the GM logo, and every reference to General Electric was removed within the attraction. To make matters even worse for Disney, they lost another sponsorship in Epcot to one of their big attractions. This also was the time that Euro Disney opened and became a massive failure, with Disney losing billions of dollars from it. Horizons was also starting to get a lot of mechanical issues and breakdowns, probably since the attraction had not changed at all since its opening day. The pavilion was due for an upgrade with its films, projection technology, and general enhancements. However, Disney deemed that these changes would be too expensive to fix and refurbished, and by this point, Horizons was not looking good for Disney. The idea is that they didn't want to spend the money on an attraction that they probably knew that they were going to be closing within the decade. So, very quickly, Disney was about to pull the plug.
Beginning October 1st, visitors will glide through mammoth motion picture projections and into three-dimensional sets. Programmers are now adding final movements to a cast of audio animatronic figures which portray 21st century families.
Horizons closed with no announcement in December of 1994. The reason is unclear even for today, but the attraction sat unused for a year until December of 1995. 2 of the Future World pavilions had been closed. Universe of Energy was getting turned into Ellen's Energy Adventure, and World of Motion was getting turned into Test Track. With the Wonders of Life pavilion being the only thing open at the time, the east side of Future World needed more attractions, so park operators decided to bring back Horizons. Ultimately, this is how things would end up for the next few years. Behind the scenes of Disney, though, they were very much looking for different experiences and attractions to replace Horizons. One idea came up in 1996 that was set to revive the space theme for the pavilion, which had been proposed since the beginning of the park's operation. The attraction was called Space, a journey into imagined realities. The attraction would have used the already existing Horizons track. The attraction would have been a 4-act story visualizing humanity's relationship with space. Included within this was a 3D experience, sorta of what Soarin' turned out to be. It honestly wasn't a terrible idea to replace Horizons. One other idea suggested to completely gutting the entire attraction and adding little smaller attractions within the building, sort of what Wonders of Life turned out to be. However, without a sponsorship attached to these concepts and the required budget and feasibility of using the existing building of Horizons, this retrofit would never move forward. Instead, Horizons continued to operate almost exactly the same as it did when it opened. A clearly outdated attraction that didn't fit with the modern late 90s guests. Ever since Horizons reopened in 1995, rumors of its closing were swirling around. Test Track was supposed to open in 1997, but was ultimately delayed until 1999. on New Year's Eve of 1998, Disney officially would announce that Horizons would be closing permanently on January 9th, 1999. This would just be a day before Test Track would officially open to the public. Disney went with their plans and Horizons closed without any future plans for its site. The beloved attraction was now in limbo, with the building and the ride now abandoned. Ropes blocked the main entrance with a sign reading, "Coming soon, a new discovery." It would sit this way for another 10 months, until members of the press were given a ride through the attraction. There's sadly no official videos or photos to officially press this claim, so it's sort of a speculation. But it did confirm that the ride was still intact and ready to go, which sparked rumors of a New Year's Eve reopening to handle the crowds. However, this ended up not happening, and that speculated press ride-through would be the last time that anybody rode Horizons. On January 31st of 2000, reports would come out saying how Disney was finalizing a brand new pavilion for Epcot called Mission Space. It would take the idea from their previous concepts of the space theme into this shaky simulator ride for this pavilion. Soon after this, a black wall would be placed around the pavilion with a simple sign reading "Space." But just a short time after that, the sign would change and would say, "Watch this space for a future announcement." This announcement would come on April 21st of 2000 when Disney held a press conference that announced Mission Space with Disney CEO Michael Eisner, along with the CEO of their new sponsor for the attraction, Compact. The event didn't give too much detail on the pavilion, but the CEO of Compact would state that,
"In fact, it's going to be so big that the current building won't hold it."
Which eventually, as you'll see later, was a false claim. Anyways, that day would finally come as demolition began on Horizons. While some parts of the attraction were reused for parts and some iconic showpieces were saved and put into the archives, the destruction revealed that big sets within the ride were coming down. That's not to say that anything within the ride wasn't saved, as small items that you could find within the attraction began to pop up on eBay. The ride vehicles within Horizons were actually sold to a theme park ride reseller. We don't know what happened to most of them, but we can probably say that most of them were most likely destroyed. Though some ride vehicles have survived and are in other theme park collections. By May of 2000, half of the building was destroyed, and shortly after that, the entire structure of the ride came down. The site of the land was cleared by August of 2000, and work began on Mission Space shortly after that. And 3 years after that, Mission Space would officially open on August 13th, 2003.
Creating Mission Space. In doing so, they have, I believe, delivered the quintessential Disney attraction.
Now, depending on what you think when it comes to Mission Space, you probably can agree that Mission Space isn't the best Disney attraction. And that goes by many reasons. Maybe it's the claustrophobic, shaking experience, or that Disney claimed that this attraction would be so much bigger than Horizons. And that's probably also because it replaced something special. Something that had the Epcot name all over it. An attraction that was specifically designed for inspiration. Maybe it's just what Disney wanted to do, as theme parks were starting to become more IP and thrill than education entertainment. However, whatever you think about Mission Space being worse than Horizons, within the attraction itself and in other parts of Disney World, you can find hidden traces left over from Horizons. The first reference is right in front of Mission Space, as you can see this hexagon planter right here. Well, back when this was Horizons, this used to be the planter that you would find right in front of the building. And when the building finally came down, the planter was left there with its hexagon shape referencing Horizons. Now, within the queue of Mission Space itself, you will eventually come into this room where you can find this giant thing called a gravity wheel. Now, this is already a reference to the gravity wheel you see in the ride, but also, if you look in the center of the gravity wheel, you can see the old Horizons logo that could have been found right in front of the attraction. Over in Magic Kingdom at Tomorrowland, when you're exiting Space Mountain, you can see some displays of what the future will look like that does reference Horizons. But in one of the display rooms, you can see a suitcase with a sticker on it reading Mesa Verta, which is a reference to the Mesa Verta crop scene that we see in the ride. But speaking of the Mesa Verta scene, if you head over to Hollywood Studios and go to the Backlot Express restaurant, you'll see a model of what appears to be a hovercraft. Well, within that Mesa Verta scene, you can see that exact same hovercraft. However, this isn't actually the real hovercraft. It is the model that was used for it. The real hovercraft was actually at the Backlot tour in Disney Paris. And finally, in the new Mission Space restaurant, Space 220, when you head into the restaurant and look out into space, you'll eventually see astronauts floating by. Well, the astronauts are part of the many astronauts that we see in the ride. So even though Horizons is now an extinct part of Disney's Epcot, I don't think it will ever be forgotten. The attraction was so unique and showed the way of how a ride could have a story, inspiration, and something for us to look forward in the future. And though I doubt that Disney will never build anything like Horizons ever again, the attraction will never be forgotten. And we can always learn one thing about the ride: the future.